Hello everyone. Have you ever thought about whether living in a democracy actually helps a country become richer? It's a question a lot of people ask. Today, we're going to dive into this very topic, the economic outcomes of democracy, and try to figure out how we should assess its performance.
So let's start with the most basic question. Does having a democracy mean a country's economy will definitely grow? You see, many of us, perhaps even our parents, often judge a government based on the country's economic situation. If the economy is doing well, we think the government is good. So let's explore this connection between democracy and economic development.
All right, let's look at some hard evidence. This table shows data from a study conducted over a long period, 50 years, from 1950 to 2000. If you look at all democratic regimes, their average growth rate was 3.95%. Now, compare that to all dictatorial regimes. Their growth rate was 4.42%. Interestingly, even if we just look at poor countries, the growth rates are very close, 4.34% under dictatorships and 4.28% under democracies.
So what does this data really tell us? Well, it shows that dictatorships have a slightly better record of economic growth. But, and this is a very important but, the difference is almost nothing. It's negligible. A tiny difference like this is definitely not a strong enough reason to say that a dictatorship is better than a democracy, right? Especially when we think about all the other things democracy gives us.
We also have to remember that a country's economic growth is a really complex thing. It doesn't just depend on whether you have a democracy or a dictatorship. So many other factors are involved. Things like the size of the country's population, what's happening in the global economy, how much help it gets from other countries, and even what the government decides are its main economic priorities.
Now, this brings us to another really important question. Even when a country's economy does grow, who is actually getting the benefit? Take a look at this cartoon. It shows the problem of inequality so clearly. The economic growth is like the big, strong arms, representing the rich, but the rest of the body, representing the poor, is weak and thin. This tells us that the benefits of growth are often not shared fairly.
So this leads us to the real heart of the matter. We shouldn't just be asking about growth. We should be asking, how good are democracies at reducing inequality and poverty? Do they create a society where every single person has a fair chance to succeed?
Let's look at some more data. This table shows income inequality in a few countries. Now look at South Africa and Brazil. The top 20% of people, the richest group, control over 60% of the country's income. And the bottom 20%, the poorest group, they have less than 3%. These are democratic countries, mind you, but the gap between the rich and the poor is huge. This quote really puts those numbers into perspective. It says that a very small group of super rich people have a massive share of all the wealth and income. Meanwhile, the people at the very bottom, the poorest in society, have almost nothing to live on. That's the harsh reality behind the percentages we just saw.
And this inequality isn't just about money. It's about opportunity. Just look at these cartoons. On the left, you see a poor child who has fallen down a staircase, and the steps are labeled schooling, healthcare. This shows that poverty stops children from getting basic things like education. The cartoon on the right shows the same idea on a global scale. A few have all the wealth, while many have nothing. Now, this is a very common point of confusion that we must clear up. In politics, democracy promises equality. The idea is one person, one vote. Everyone has an equal say in choosing their leaders. But this political equality does not automatically lead to economic equality. In reality, we often see that the gap between the rich and poor is getting wider even in democracies.
So, you might be asking, what is the role of democracy then? Well, think of it this way. Democracy doesn't guarantee economic equality, but it creates the conditions for it. It gives citizens the tools, like the right to protest, to form unions, and to demand better policies from the government. Democracy opens the door for people to fight for economic justice, but it is the citizens who have to take that step and walk through that door.
This brings us to a much bigger question that I want you to think about. Is a country's economic performance the only way we should judge a democracy? Is a high growth rate the only thing that matters? Is that a fair and complete way to look at a system of government?
The truth is, the value of democracy goes far beyond just money and economic numbers. It's about important human values. It's about dignity for every person. It's about having a system to solve disagreements peacefully. And maybe most importantly, it gives citizens the power to hold their government accountable and correct its mistakes.
So, to wrap up, we've learned that judging a democracy only by its economic growth is too simple and misses the bigger picture. The issue is much more complex. And this discussion is the perfect starting point for our next lesson, where we will look at how democracies can and do work towards reducing inequality and poverty. We will explore that in detail next time.